Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the forgotten corners of Ontario's small towns, through frozen hearts of rural communities, isolated streets buried under snow, endless stretches of forest, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories ever reported from these quiet towns. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people, men and women who believed nothing could happen where they lived. Until it did. From abandoned farmhouses to silent main streets after midnight, from basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight you will hear horrors that still haunt Ontario's small towns. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily, true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Ontario's small towns, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 26 years old. Living in a quiet Ontario town most people pass without noticing. Maple Hollow Road was the kind of place where everyone waved, doors stayed unlocked, and the loudest sound at night was the wind moving through frozen trees. I worked late shifts at a small auto shop, and every night I drove home alone just after midnight. What bothered me wasn't the darkness, it was the lights. Halfway down Maple Hollow Road sat an old farmhouse that officially belonged to no one. No mailbox, no tire tracks, no power account registered to it. And yet, every single night, one upstairs window glowed with a soft, yellow light. Always the same window. Always the same hour. At first, I told myself someone lived there quietly, avoiding town gossip. But the longer I watched that light, the more uneasy I felt. It never flickered, never dimmed. And no matter how slow I drove, I never once saw a silhouette behind the glass. That was the first sign something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, that light became impossible to ignore. No matter how exhausted I was, my eyes always drifted toward that upstairs window as I passed. I started timing it. The glow appeared at exactly 12:07 a.m. every night and vanished at 1:13 a.m. sharp. Not a minute earlier, not a second late. I asked around at work, joking at first. Anyone live on Maple Hollow Road? The laughter died quickly. One of the older mechanics, Ron, stiffened when I mentioned the farmhouse. He told me nobody had lived there since a family disappeared nearly 15 years ago. No bodies, no goodbye. Just an empty house and a locked investigation file. That night, curiosity outweighed fear. I slowed my truck and pulled over across from the property. The air felt heavier near the fence, like sound itself was being swallowed. The light glowed steadily, brighter up close. Then something moved behind the curtain. Not a person, something too tall, too still. And it felt like it was watching me back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape behind the curtain, too narrow at the waist, too long at the arms. By morning, I convinced myself exhaustion had played tricks on me. Still, the feeling of being watched followed me through the day, like a cold draft I couldn't escape. That evening, I went back, this time on foot. I told myself I just wanted proof, something ordinary to kill the fear growing in my chest. Snow crunched loudly beneath my boots as I crossed the ditch and approached the fence. Up close, the farmhouse looked worse than abandoned. Wood rotted inward, windows sealed from the inside, and the front door bore long scratch marks, as if something had tried desperately to get out. At 12:07 a.m., the upstairs lights snapped on. Instantly, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged thick in front of me. I raised my phone to record. That's when I heard it. Slow footsteps, coming from inside the walls. The footsteps didn't sound human. They were too deliberate, too heavy, moving not across floors, but inside the walls themselves. I stood frozen as the noise traveled from the back of the house toward the front, stopping directly behind the door, inches from where I stood. I wanted to run, but fear pinned me in place. My phone screen flickered, the recording distorting into static. Then the light upstairs began to pulse slowly, like a heartbeat. With each pulse, the pressure in my head grew stronger, as if something was pressing its thoughts into mine. Images flooded my mind. People standing in that same yard, staring up at the light, unable to move. I realized then why no one ever saw anyone in the window. The light wasn't for living inside the house. It was bait. The door handle began to turn from the inside, inch by inch, accompanied by a wet, strained breathing sound. I dropped my phone and ran, not stopping until my lungs burned and the farmhouse disappeared behind the trees. For 3 days after that night, I avoided Maple Hollow Road entirely. I took longer routes home, burned extra fuel, and told my boss I needed earlier shifts. Still, the image of that door handle turning replayed in my mind on a loop. What terrified me most wasn't that something had tried to come out. It was the certainty that it had known I was there long before I approached the house. On the 4th night, just after midnight, my phone vibrated on my kitchen table. A notification from an unknown number. No message. Just a photo. It was taken from inside the farmhouse. The angle was low, as if the camera were being held at chest level by something very tall. The photo showed the road outside, my tire tracks frozen in the snow, and me standing near the fence, my face blurred, but unmistakably mine. The timestamp read 12:07 a.m. That's when I noticed the reflection in the window glass. Behind the camera, something thin and wrong, its head brushing the ceiling. I took the photo to the police the next morning. They listened politely, exchanged looks, and told me the image metadata was corrupted. No sender, no origin. One officer quietly asked if I'd been drinking. That was when I realized I was alone with this. That night, the light didn't turn on at the farmhouse. For the first time since I'd noticed it, Maple Hollow Road stayed completely dark. I should have felt relieved. Instead, dread settled deep in my chest. At 1:13 a.m., there was a knock on my front door. Slow, heavy, patient. I stood at the top of the stairs, heart hammering, staring at the shadow beneath the door. It stretched far too long, bending slightly, as if whoever, or whatever, stood outside wasn't built to fit human spaces. Then my porch light flicked on by itself. Through the frosted glass, I saw the same yellow glow from the farmhouse window, pulsing softly, waiting. The light hadn't disappeared. It had followed me home. I didn't answer the door. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, counting my breaths, listening as the knocking continued. 3 slow raps, a pause, then 3 more. It never rushed. It never grew angry. That patience terrified me more than rage ever could. After several minutes, the knocking stopped. I waited, muscles screaming, ears straining for any sound. Then came something worse. Footsteps, not walking away, but circling my house. I heard them crunch through snow, stop beneath windows, linger, then move on. Every time they paused, the yellow light outside brightened, casting warped shadows across my walls. It felt like the house was being studied, measured, learned. My phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time it showed my front door from outside. The angle was too high, looking down. The caption beneath the image read only 3 words. You noticed first. The footsteps returned to the porch. The door handle twitched once, then went still. The next morning, Maple Hollow Road was swarming with police cars. Not for me, but for the neighbor 2 houses down. His name was Colin, a quiet man who worked nights like I did. Sometime after 1 a.m., he vanished. His front door was found open, porch light on, tire tracks leading nowhere. When an officer asked if I'd noticed anything unusual, my mouth went dry. I thought of the message. You noticed first. I nodded and told them about the farmhouse, the light, the photos. Their expressions hardened immediately. One of them admitted Colin had complained about the same thing, an unexplained light, always at the same time. He'd started watching it from his porch. That night, as I packed to leave town for good, my phone buzzed one last time. A final photo. It showed the farmhouse window again. Only this time, there were 2 silhouettes standing inside the light, one tall and one that looked painfully human. I left town that night, driving under a sky that seemed heavier than usual. Every shadow on the road made my stomach knot. I tried to convince myself it was over, that leaving Ontario would leave the farmhouse behind. But deep down, I knew the light didn't belong to that house. It belonged to whoever or whatever was waiting, and it could appear anywhere. Weeks passed. I rented a small apartment in a neighboring city, thinking distance would protect me. I slept with every light on, doors locked, blinds drawn. For a while, I heard nothing. Until one morning, a delivery arrived. A small envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid of my apartment living room. The timestamp read 12:07 a.m., and in the corner of the image, just visible in the shadows, was a tall, thin figure, head scraping the ceiling. It had followed me, and I knew, with a cold certainty, it would never stop. I tried to tell myself I could ignore it, live a normal life, and pretend it didn't exist. But every night, at exactly 12:07 a.m., the world changed. Lights flickered, shadows stretched unnaturally across my walls, phones buzzed with pictures I didn't take. Doors rattled as if something were testing them. I realized that Maple Hollow Road had never been a place. It had been a warning, a beacon for something that hunts through attention, through curiosity, through noticing. And once it chooses you, distance doesn't matter. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't walk past abandoned houses. I don't even leave my apartment after dark. But every time I glance at the window and see a hint of yellow, I know it's watching. Always waiting, always patient. If you ever drive through a quiet town in Ontario and see a single yellow light in a forgotten window, do not stare. Do not slow down. Do not notice. Because if you do, it notices you first. My name is Lila Thompson, and this happened during the fall of 2018. I had moved to a small Renfrew town in Ontario to escape the chaos of the city, drawn to its quiet streets and the promise of open forests. Locals spoke little about the woods behind the outskirts, just murmurs of strange sounds and people disappearing. I laughed it off as typical small-town superstition. It started the night I went for a late walk along a trail I'd followed countless times during daylight. The air smelled damp and sharp with decaying leaves. The trees were bare, skeletal against the moonlight. I thought I heard someone whisper my name, soft as a breath, carried between the trunks. Layla. I froze, convinced it was the wind. But the whispers grew clearer, weaving between the trees like they were speaking from multiple directions at once. I turned, shining my flashlight toward the underbrush. But there was nothing. Only the silent forest and the shadows that didn't quite match the shapes of the trees. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. My heart raced as I quickened my pace along the trail, the crunch of leaves underfoot sounding unnaturally loud. The whispers didn't stop. They grew more insistent, circling me, shifting with the wind, yet never fading. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps behind me. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the darkness was empty. The trail stretched on endlessly, but the forest seemed to lean in, trapping me in its shadows. Suddenly, the whispers turned into voices, low and urgent, speaking words I couldn't fully understand. "Leave. Now," they said. But the tone wasn't warning. It was pleasure, almost savoring the fear it invoked. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees. When I looked up, I saw a dim yellow glow between the trees, faintly flickering, as if the forest itself was alive and beckoning me deeper. I scrambled to my feet, my hands slick with mud, and ran toward the flickering glow. My rational mind screamed to turn back, but an unexplainable pull kept drawing me forward. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping and echoing, each voice calling my name with a strange, hungry tone. The glow led me to a small clearing I had never seen before, though I'd walked this trail dozens of times. In the center stood an old stone well, its surface slick with moss, emitting a faint yellow light from deep within. I leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness. My flashlight revealed nothing, just an endless black void. But the whispers now surrounded me completely, circling my head. A chill ran down my spine when I realized the voices were not coming from the well. They were coming from the trees themselves, as if the forest had a mouth. I stepped back, but the ground beneath me shifted, almost alive, and I stumbled once again, falling to my knees as the glow pulsed brighter. I couldn't take my eyes off the well. Something inside seemed to move, shifting like a shadow with too many angles, almost breathing. The whispers grew louder, pressing into my mind, repeating my name and promising something I couldn't understand, yet instinctively feared. I forced myself to step back, my legs trembling. But the forest didn't let me leave. Branches reached down like hands, scraping my shoulders and face. The path I had taken to arrive now appeared distorted, trees rearranging subtly, twisting in ways that defied reality. I was trapped. Then, from the darkness behind me, a figure emerged. It was pale and thin, standing unnaturally straight, with long arms that almost brushed the ground. Its eyes glowed faintly yellow, mirroring the light from the well. It tilted its head and whispered, no, sang, a single word that froze my blood. Join. The ground beneath me felt like it was sinking. Panic surged as I realized the forest was no longer just watching. It was swallowing. I scrambled backward, my hands clawing at the cold, wet earth, trying to put distance between myself and that figure. The whispers intensified, no longer gentle voices, but sharp, malicious murmurs, rattling my skull from every angle. I tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping my palms and knees. The pale figure glided closer without a sound, its head tilting as if studying me, measuring my fear. Suddenly, the glow from the well flared, and I caught a glimpse of movement inside, something writhing, something alive and unnatural. My heart raced, but survival instincts overrode curiosity. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slashing at my face and arms, the whispers chasing me, following my every step. After what felt like hours, I burst out onto the main road leading back to town. The whispering stopped abruptly. Silence enveloped me, but the oppressive dread lingered, heavy in my chest. I didn't dare look back, but I knew the forest hadn't released me willingly. I reached the town edge and collapsed against a street lamp, gasping and shaking, the cool autumn air stinging my lungs. People walked past me, oblivious to my terror. I wanted to scream, to tell them, but the words stuck in my throat. The forest was behind me physically, but I felt its presence lingering, reaching, waiting. That night, I locked all doors and windows, double-checked every corner of my small rented home, and tried to sleep. But at exactly 12:07 a.m., I awoke to the unmistakable sound of whispering outside my window. My blood ran cold. The voices were clearer than ever, calling my name in that same haunting chorus. I dared a glance outside. There, at the edge of the dim streetlight, was the pale figure, its head tilted, eyes glowing yellow, standing perfectly still. And behind it, faintly, a flicker of the same light from the forest, well, as if the woods had followed me into town. I knew then that the woods were not bound by geography. They were bound by attention, and I had given them mine. I didn't dare move. I sat frozen on my apartment couch, staring out the window at the empty street, praying it was gone. The whispers persisted, soft at first, then rising in pitch, weaving around my ears like they were inside my skull. Every shadow in the room seemed to shift, stretching longer, bending unnaturally. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Then came a tap, soft but deliberate, at my window. My pulse slammed in my chest. I approached cautiously, inching the curtains aside. Outside, the pale figure stood motionless, but the glow from the well seemed to hover around it now, illuminating more than just its eyes. Its thin fingers tapped on the glass in rhythm with the whispers. Suddenly, I noticed footprints forming in the wet street below, appearing out of nowhere. They led toward the forest, as if the pale figure had walked straight through the street, leaving no trace in the asphalt, only a path of fear. I realized with a chill, it didn't just follow. It adapted. The next night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment seemed magnified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even my own heartbeat. At 12:07 a.m., the whispers returned, louder than ever, more insistent. They were no longer calling my name. They were guiding me. Compelled by terror and something worse, curiosity, I followed the voices. They led me to the basement door. I had no memory of walking, yet there I was, trembling, flashlight in hand. The door creaked as I descended, each step amplifying the whispers until they surrounded me completely. At the bottom, the air was frigid, thick with the scent of damp earth. In the corner, a faint yellow glow pulsed. It wasn't the well, yet it mirrored its light perfectly. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, forming shapes that resembled trees, figures, faces, impossible geometry. And then I saw it, the pale figure, kneeling, its long arms reaching toward a small pool of glowing water, whispering secrets only the forest could know. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hands as the pale figure slowly straightened and turned its head toward me. Its glowing yellow eyes seemed to pierce directly into my soul. The whispers intensified, no longer gentle or coaxing, but harsh, urgent, almost commanding. I realized with a cold horror that the forest itself was speaking through it, and it had chosen me. The pool of light from the basement floor pulsed with a heartbeat-like rhythm. From its center, a faint mist began to rise, forming shapes. Faces twisted in silent screams, hands reaching out for me. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the basement steps. The whispers became a chant, repeating, "Join! Join! Join!" Panic surged through me. I bolted up the stairs, the basement door slamming behind me as if the house itself had pushed me out. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, barricading myself inside. But even through the locked doors and drawn curtains, I could feel it. The forest waiting, patient, eternal. A presence that didn't need to be seen to terrify. Weeks passed. I moved out of Renfrew, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the whispering woods. Yet the whispers never fully left me. At exactly 12:07 a.m. every night, no matter where I was, I could hear them faintly, coaxing me back, reminding me that attention had consequences. I tried to rebuild a normal life, but my dreams were haunted by that pale figure, the flickering light of the forest well, and the chorus of voices whispering my name. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, I could swear I saw a faint yellow glow at the edge of my vision, a reminder that the forest had claimed a piece of me. If you ever wander through Ontario's forests late at night, and you hear a faint whisper calling your name, remember this. Curiosity is a path the woods exploit. The forest is patient. The forest is eternal. And if it notices you, it will never let you go. My name is Marcus Bell, and this happened during a summer camping trip in 2017. I had always loved the solitude of Algonquin Provincial Park, with its deep forests, crystal clear lakes, and the silence that pressed down like a heavy blanket. My friends and I had rented a small canoe and planned a weekend far from cell service and city lights. The first night was uneventful. We set up camp near a small, secluded lake that locals called Whisper Lake, though the name seemed quaint at first. The water was calm, reflecting the full moon perfectly. But as midnight approached, I noticed a strange shimmer across the far shore, like the tree line was moving subtly, breathing in the moonlight. Then I heard it, a soft, gurgling whisper coming from the water itself. At first, I assumed it was a beaver or the wind, but it grew clearer, a voice calling my name, low and wet. I turned to wake my friends, but the shoreline looked different. The trees seemed denser, darker, impossibly close. I tried to dismiss it as imagination, but the whispering persisted. I leaned closer to the water's edge, straining to hear. The voice was unmistakable now, wet, distorted, and urgently calling my name. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Marcus, come closer." The lake's surface began to ripple unnaturally, as if something beneath it were moving against the current of reality itself. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the water, and my friends, now awake, shouted at me to stop staring. But when they looked at the lake, it appeared calm, reflecting the moonlight like nothing had happened. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. When we turned in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me from beneath the water. Every splash, every ripple seemed deliberate, almost sentient. By dawn, the lake had changed subtly. The far shore I had admired the previous evening seemed further away, and some of the trees appeared. Older, warped, almost twisted toward the water. That afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I wandered along the shoreline, trying to convince myself it was just nerves. The further I walked, the quieter the forest became. Even the birds seemed to vanish. The air felt thick, heavy, like water trapped in the trees. Then I noticed footprints in the sand. Mine, I thought at first, until I realized they led toward the middle of the lake. And they weren't fading. They were sinking into the water as if the lake itself was swallowing them. I froze, heart hammering, staring at the surface. Small ripples moved in unnatural patterns, converging toward a single point. A faint, greenish-yellow glow began to rise from the water. The lake didn't just reflect light, it produced it. From the depths came a soft, wet whisper. "Marcus." The voice was desperate, pleading, and somehow filled with malice. I ran back to camp, splashing through the wet sand, but the lake's glow seemed to follow me, creeping along the shoreline as if alive. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lake glowing, the ripples forming shapes. Faces screaming silently, hands reaching upward, pleading for help. My friends tried to calm me, but I could tell they were uneasy too. The forest felt different, more oppressive, as if it had grown overnight. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the whispers returned, louder and clearer than before. I could hear footsteps in the water, splashing softly yet echoing unnaturally. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it across the lake. The beam hit the far shore, and I froze. Trees that were solid hours ago now appeared twisted, warped, their trunks bending toward the water as if leaning in to listen. Then I saw movement in the middle of the lake. Something pale, humanoid, and impossibly thin rose slowly from the glowing water. Its eyes reflected the light of the moon, cold and unblinking. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, realizing that the lake had been waiting, and it had chosen me first. I stumbled backward, tripping over rocks and sand, my flashlight tumbling into the water. The pale figure remained perfectly still, rising slowly from the lake, its long limbs dripping and distorted, eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. The whispers surged, overlapping now in dozens of voices, repeating my name in a wet, urgent chorus. My friends shouted for me to run, but fear froze us all. The lake's surface began to bubble violently, forming shapes that seemed humanoid, clawing at the air, then disappearing back into the depths. I realized with horror that the lake wasn't natural. It was alive, aware, and it hungered. I turned and ran blindly toward the forest edge, branches tearing at my clothes, roots tripping my feet. Behind me, the pale figure glided across the water, moving faster than any human could, following me relentlessly. Even as I left the shoreline, I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing into my back. Its gaze locked onto me, patient and eternal. We didn't stop running until we reached the nearest ranger station, gasping, soaked, and trembling. The park was empty, eerily silent, as if the forest itself had swallowed any sign of life. The rangers listened to our story with polite concern, jotting down notes. But their eyes betrayed disbelief, or perhaps knowledge of something they couldn't say aloud. That night, back in town at a motel, I thought the nightmare was over. I tried to sleep, but at exactly 12:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. A single photo had appeared on my camera roll, taken with no memory of capturing it. It was the lake, from the middle, glowing greenish yellow. And in the reflection, I saw the pale figure, standing in the water, staring directly at me, its eyes piercing through the lens like it could reach across miles. I knew then the lake hadn't been contained by geography. It followed attention, choosing those who dared to look too closely. And once it had chosen, there was no escape. The following night, I couldn't resist checking the lake again, though every instinct screamed against it. I drove back toward the edge of the park, careful to keep the lights low. The forest loomed like a wall of shadow, and the lake, from a distance, already seemed wrong. It pulsed faintly under the moonlight, a sickly green-yellow glow that seemed to breathe. As I parked and stepped toward the shoreline, I noticed the water moving unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled human figures kneeling, their heads bowed as if worshipping something in the depths. The whispers returned, soft and wet, caressing my ears, calling my name with hunger. I felt the coldness of the lake reach out, like water wrapping around my ankles, holding me in place. Then I saw it. The pale figure rising again, taller this time, arms longer, stretching unnaturally. Its head tilted toward me as it whispered, "You cannot leave. Not yet." I stumbled backward, realizing the lake's hunger was patient but inevitable, and my curiosity had chained me. I fell to my knees at the water's edge, heart hammering, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The pale figure moved closer, gliding effortlessly over the ripples, and I could see now that its limbs were impossibly thin, unnaturally jointed, almost like the lake itself had shaped it. The whispers crescendoed into a chorus of demands. "Come, join, forever." My friends, who had stayed behind in the car, screamed my name. But the sound was muffled, distant as if underwater. The air around the lake thickened, wet with the scent of decay and cold mud. I looked down at the water and caught my own reflection, but it wasn't alone. Hundreds of faint faces swirled beneath the surface, screaming silently, reaching toward me with translucent hands. The pale figure extended one long arm, and the water responded, pulling me toward the lake's center. I realized, with terror, that the lake didn't just claim the living. It collected the curious, storing them in its depths forever. I tried to scramble backward, my hands digging into the wet sand, but the ground beneath me felt strangely unstable, as if the lake itself was pulling at my feet. The pale figure's yellow eyes never blinked, fixed on me with a patience that was unbearable. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a maddening chorus that clawed at my mind. I reached for my flashlight, shining it across the lake. The glow revealed dozens of faint silhouettes rising from the water, pale and humanoid, arms outstretched, bodies contorted. They floated just above the surface, moving slowly toward the shoreline. I realized with horror that the lake was not confined by distance. The moment it chose you, it could extend its reach, bending reality to draw you in. I screamed for my friends, but even their voices were swallowed by the wet chorus of whispers. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and fell against a tree, the ground trembling slightly beneath me, as if warning me I was too close. The lake had claimed my attention, and now it wanted everything. I ran blindly, the whispers following, echoing in my skull. Every step toward my car felt like wading through thick water. Yet when I turned back, the lake appeared calm, almost peaceful, its greenish-yellow glow subdued but still watching. I never dared to look too long. Back in town, sleep came in fractured bursts. Every night at 12:07 a.m., my dreams were invaded by rippling water, glowing eyes, and the chorus of faces beneath the surface. My friends refused to return to the lake after that night, but I knew it wasn't gone. It followed attention, curiosity, obsession, anyone who dared watch for too long. Years later, I still receive photos from my own camera, taken with no memory of clicking the shutter. Each shows the lake glowing faintly in the distance. In some, I see the pale figure, closer than I remember, eyes fixed on me. The lake doesn't forgive curiosity, and once it notices you, it will never let you go. My name is Jenna Harper, and this happened during a solo road trip through Ontario in the summer of 2019. I was driving late at night, exhausted, when I spotted a small, dimly lit motel along a deserted stretch of Kawartha Lakes. The neon sign flickered weakly, and though the parking lot was nearly empty, it seemed inviting. Desperation overrode caution. The receptionist was an elderly man with pale skin and an unsettlingly quiet demeanor. He didn't ask for ID or much information, just handed me a key for room 7 and smiled faintly, too wide for his age. The hallway leading to my room smelled of damp carpet and a faint metallic tang I couldn't identify. The lights flickered intermittently, and though no one else was around, I felt eyes following me as I walked. Once inside, I unpacked quickly, but a strange silence settled over the motel. No cars, no insects, no distant voices, just an oppressive stillness. And then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tap from the ceiling above. Like someone walking slowly across the floor, I froze, listening. The tapping continued. Slow, deliberate, methodical, moving above me from one end of the ceiling to the other. I knocked lightly on the floor, but it stopped. Silence returned, heavy and unnatural. I tried to convince myself it was the old building settling, but my gut told me otherwise. As I unpacked, I noticed a small door in the corner of the room I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, revealing a dark crawl space behind it. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, shallow, measured, like someone watching from within. My instincts screamed to leave, but exhaustion and curiosity kept me rooted. I called the front desk, but the line was dead. Even my cell phone had no signal. The tapping started again, this time synchronized with a low whispering I could barely make out. "Jenna, come closer." I realized with a shiver that the motel wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. Waiting for someone like me. I couldn't stop staring at that corner door. Every instinct told me to leave immediately, but the exhaustion in my body and the strange pull of curiosity kept me rooted. The whispering returned, low and wet, curling around my ears, repeating my name in that same deliberate cadence. Finally, I worked up the courage to open the door fully. The crawl space was small, pitch black, and smelled of damp earth and decay. As my flashlight cut through the darkness, I saw something etched into the wall. A series of scratch marks that resembled words, but I couldn't make them out. The scratching noises above intensified, as if the ceiling itself were reacting to my intrusion. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. Something was watching me from above. The tapping became rhythmic again, deliberate, almost mocking, accompanied by a low hum that vibrated in my chest. I realized with a chill that the motel wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, aware of every movement I made. The whispers grew louder, merging with the creaking floorboards above me. Every tap sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the room. I pressed myself against the far wall, my flashlight shaking, illuminating only fragments of the room while darkness seemed to close in around me. Then I noticed something else. The reflection in the cracked motel mirror. It wasn't my own face I saw clearly. Behind me, a pale figure crouched in the crawl space, thin and elongated, its eyes glowing faint yellow. Its long, spindly fingers reached toward the floor, as if trying to touch me through the reflection itself. I stumbled back, my mind racing, realizing the motel didn't just contain the entity, it used the building as part of itself. Suddenly, the air grew icy. The whispering became a chant. "Stay, stay forever." The crawlspace door slammed shut on its own. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. The motel was alive, and I was inside its grasp. I fumbled for my phone in the dark, hoping for light. But the screen remained black, dead. The whispers had grown into a chorus now, echoing from every corner of the room, pressing against my ears like invisible hands. I crawled toward the door, heart hammering, but it wouldn't budge. The handle rattled as if something on the other side was testing me, laughing silently. Then I felt it, a cold, wet brush against my arm. I screamed, jerking back, and the flashlight flickered back to life for a second. In that brief light, I saw the pale figure emerging from the crawl space, its long limbs bending unnaturally as it glided toward me. Its eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence. I scrambled backward, falling onto the bed, my mind racing. I realized with absolute clarity that this motel didn't just trap people physically. It fed on attention, fear, and curiosity. Every sound I had made, every step I had taken, had drawn it closer. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the bedpost, trying to slow my breathing. The whispers had morphed into full sentences now, hissing threats and demands. "Stay! Stay! Never leave!" The air was cold and wet, and every surface in the room seemed alive, pulsating slightly under the pressure of the entity's presence. The crawl space door creaked open again, as if drawn by my fear. The figure advanced slowly, gliding across the floor without touching it, the shadows twisting unnaturally behind it. I noticed the walls beginning to warp, stretching toward the center of the room, creating a tunnel-like effect, drawing me in. Panic overtook me. I darted for the door, slamming my shoulder against it. It gave way partially, enough for me to squeeze out, stumbling into the hall. The corridor stretched impossibly long, no matter how far I ran. Every door I passed whispered my name. I realized with horror that the motel didn't exist in normal space. It bent reality to trap its victims inside. I ran blindly down the corridor, the flickering lights casting shadows that seemed alive. The whispers followed me, morphing into voices of previous guests, warning, mocking, crying out for help. The air grew heavier with each step, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest. My legs burned, but I couldn't stop. The motel had me in its grasp. The pale figure emerged again at the far end of the hall, gliding smoothly, its limbs stretching impossibly long, eyes locked on mine. The walls twisted further, the hallway seeming to bend and elongate with every second. The rooms I passed were filled with shadows and faces pressed against doors and windows, staring silently at me. I realized then that every room contained a fragment of the motel's victims, trapped and twisted into its architecture. I stumbled, nearly falling, and the figure drew closer. The whispering grew urgent. "Do not leave. Belong." I forced myself upright, knowing that whatever this motel was, it fed on those who dared to look too closely. I reached a stairwell and darted down the steps, hearing the scraping of limbs across the floor above me, each tap echoing like a heartbeat. The whispering was deafening now, a chorus of names, cries, and commands, wrapping around me like a noose. The air was icy, each breath visible, forming faint clouds in the dark. At the bottom, the lobby stretched impossibly wide, far larger than I remembered. The neon sign from outside glowed faintly through the front windows, but the parking lot was gone, replaced by endless dark space that seemed to extend into the void. The pale figure appeared at the center, its limbs bending in unnatural angles, waiting. Its eyes burned, glowing yellow, and the whispers merged into a single chilling sentence. "You cannot leave. Not tonight. Not ever." I realized with terror that the motel was alive, reshaping reality to trap anyone who entered. Every escape I attempted would lead me further into its endless corridors, feeding its hunger for fear and curiosity. I ran blindly through the warped lobby, my heart hammering, every step echoing unnaturally in the impossible space. The pale figure glided behind me, moving without making a sound, its elongated limbs stretching across the floor like dark, living shadows. The whispers had turned into urgent commands. Stay, belong, never leave. They clawed at my mind, pressing me toward the center of the motel, toward the figure. I tried every exit, the front door, side doors, even the stairwell I had come down. But each led me back into the lobby, stretching endlessly, walls shifting to trap me. The air was icy, damp, and smelled faintly of decay and rust. I realized with dawning horror that the motel wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, alive and aware, and I had become its latest prey. The figure extended one hand toward me. My instincts screamed to resist, but the whispers promised a strange safety and surrender. I felt the oppressive force pulling me forward, unstoppable, inevitable. I collapsed to the floor, desperate, and for a moment, everything went silent. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the walls and floors. The pale figure loomed over me, its glowing yellow eyes fixed, unblinking. And I realized it had been waiting not just for me, but for my fear. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly toward a faint light at the edge of the lobby. The front doors, once unreachable, now appeared before me. I slammed through them and found myself outside. The parking lot was real again, quiet, empty, moonlight reflecting off the asphalt. I ran to my car without looking back. Even now, years later, I can't drive through Kawartha Lakes without feeling a weight on my shoulders, a presence at the edge of my vision. The motel didn't follow me physically. It doesn't need to. It feeds on curiosity, fear, and memory. Once it chooses you, it never truly lets go. My name is Ethan Crowley, and this happened during the winter of 2018. I had just moved into a small rented house on Redstone Road, a secluded stretch on the outskirts of a tiny Ontario town. The house was old, creaking with every gust of wind and surrounded by dense forest. The locals had warned me that the road was quiet for a reason, but I laughed it off. The first night was deceptively peaceful. Snow fell softly, muffling the world outside. But as I was getting ready for bed, I heard faint scratching sounds coming from the attic. I paused, heart quickening, and listened. The scratches were deliberate, rhythmic, like nails tracing across the wooden beams above. I called out, "Hello?" But no answer came. Only the sound of the scratches continued, growing more insistent. I tried to tell myself it was mice, or maybe the old wood settling. But the rhythm was too controlled, too deliberate to be anything natural. I decided to investigate the attic the next morning. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the house. The door to the attic was small, old, with peeling paint and a rusted latch. I hesitated, feeling a chill crawl up my spine, but pushed it open. Inside, the attic was cramped, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. Everything seemed normal at first. But then I noticed the walls. Strange scratch marks covered them, deep, deliberate, not made by animals. They formed patterns that almost looked like symbols, jagged lines that seemed to twist when I looked away. As I stepped closer, I felt a sudden cold gust brush past me, carrying with it a whisper. "Leave. Now." My breath caught in my throat. The scratches seemed fresh, almost bleeding into the dust. Something in that attic was alive, aware of my presence, and it did not want me there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house felt amplified. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps pacing above me. Around midnight, I heard it again. The scratching, deliberate and slow, moving across the attic floor. My heart raced as I realized it was no longer random. It was following a pattern, almost like it was circling the attic, hunting for me. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the stairs, gripping it like a weapon. The attic door groaned as I pushed it open. This time, I saw it, faint but unmistakable. A shadow moving across the beams. It wasn't fully visible, just a twisted, humanoid silhouette, limbs too long, movements jerky and unnatural. The scratching stopped the moment I shone my light toward it. But then the whispering began, soft at first, growing steadily. "You shouldn't be here. Leave." I stumbled back, nearly tripping, heart pounding. It felt like the house itself was alive, and the attic was the epicenter of its attention. The next day, I tried to rationalize everything. I told myself it was my imagination, stress, or maybe an animal trapped in the attic. But the marks on the walls told a different story. Fresh scratches seemed to appear overnight, forming new symbols I hadn't seen before. My phone even malfunctioned, flickering with static when I tried to take photos. That night, the scratching returned with greater intensity, accompanied by footsteps pacing in the hallway below. I grabbed a baseball bat and cautiously descended the stairs, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I reached the living room, the air suddenly turned icy, my breath visible in front of me. The whispering grew louder. "You cannot leave." I froze, and then I saw it. A thin, shadowy figure, unnaturally tall, gliding just above the floor. Its eyes were two pale glimmers in the dark, fixed on me with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. I realized the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and I was its newest obsession. I spent hours pacing the living room, gripping the baseball bat, trying to convince myself to leave. But every time I approached the door, a low whispering echoed behind me. "Stay. Stay with us." It wasn't just the figure now. It felt like the entire house was aware of my presence, pressing in from all sides. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, vibrating with anticipation. I made the mistake of returning to the attic. The door creaked open slowly, and a gust of icy air slammed against my face. The shadowy figure was perched atop a beam, limbs unnaturally twisted, eyes fixed directly on me. Scratches spread across the walls, forming new symbols that pulsed like veins. I heard faint footsteps behind me, except no one was there. The house had a rhythm, and I was now part of it, a participant in its living nightmare. Fear overwhelmed me, but I couldn't turn away. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I felt compelled to stare into the darkness. The house wanted my attention, and it was winning. I backed out of the attic, my hands shaking, heart hammering like a drum. The whispering had escalated into a chorus, chanting my name in wet, guttural tones. The stairs creaked underfoot, and I realized the house was guiding me, manipulating my movements, forcing me toward the living room. As I stumbled into the room, the figure glided toward me, moving impossibly fast for its size. Its elongated fingers reached out, but never touched the floor, as if it floated just above reality. The walls seemed to close in, bending inward slightly, whispering in unison. "You belong here." I bolted toward the front door, but it slammed shut with supernatural force. Windows rattled, snow swirling violently outside, as if responding to the entity's presence. I screamed, pounding on the door, and the whispers intensified, circling my head, surrounding me. The house was alive, intelligent, feeding on my terror. and I understood that escape wouldn't come easily. I sank to the floor, gripping the baseball bat like a lifeline, my chest heaving. The figure glided closer, its limbs bending in impossible angles, casting jagged shadows that danced on the walls. The whispering became a low, guttural chant that vibrated through the house itself, echoing off the ceiling and walls. Every heartbeat felt amplified, matching the rhythm of the entity's movement. I scrambled to the front door, yanking on the handle with all my strength. It budged slightly, but then slammed back against me with a force that sent me sprawling. The house groaned, the wooden beams bending as if alive, pressing down on me. I could feel the cold brush of the figure's presence circling, waiting for my next move. In that moment, I realized the house didn't just want me scared. It wanted me trapped, part of its collection, a permanent resident in its twisted, living architecture. And yet, I refused to surrender. Desperate, I ran toward the staircase, praying for an exit, my flashlight beam flickering across warped walls and twisted furniture. The whispers followed relentlessly, now chanting my name in overlapping, echoing tones, pushing me forward and downward simultaneously. The air was icy, carrying the metallic tang of decay, and the floorboards beneath my feet seemed to pulse with the house's malevolence. At the bottom of the stairs, the living room had changed again. The furniture had shifted, creating a labyrinth that funneled me toward the center. There, the pale figure waited, motionless yet terrifyingly alive, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The whispers coalesced into one chilling command. "You cannot leave. You are ours now." I realized that no matter where I ran, the house would follow, bending space and time to keep me inside. Redstone Road wasn't just haunted. It was alive, a predator that thrived on fear, and I had become its newest prey. I darted toward a faint glimmer of moonlight coming through a side window, hoping it was a way out. The figure glided silently behind me, moving faster than it should have been able to, limbs bending in impossible, jagged angles. The whispers had merged into a deafening chorus of demands. Stay, belong, never leave. My chest burned with fear, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if the house itself was pressing down on me. I reached the window and yanked it open, the cold night air rushing in. The figure stopped abruptly at the sill, hovering silently, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on me. For the first time, I noticed faint scratches along its elongated fingers, like they had been marking the world, claiming it as theirs. My instincts screamed to escape, and I climbed out onto the snow-covered ground, stumbling into the forest beyond. Even as I ran, I knew the house wasn't defeated. It had claimed my attention, and that was enough for it to continue feeding on me. I ran blindly through the forest, snow crunching underfoot, heart hammering, the whispering now replaced by a suffocating silence. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I looked back. The house stood there as if nothing had happened, perfectly still, windows dark. Yet I knew better. Its presence lingered, a cold, unseen weight pressing on my mind. Even weeks later, every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure gliding through my dreams, limbs stretching impossibly, yellow eyes piercing the darkness. My phone sometimes captured strange shadows in photos, unexplained scratches appeared on walls, and I constantly felt watched. Redstone Road wasn't just a road, and the house wasn't just a building. It was alive, intelligent, and patient. It didn't need to chase you, it simply waited, knowing curiosity and fear would bring you back. Once it knows your name, it never forgets. My name is Lena Thompson, and this happened during a solo canoe trip in the summer of 2020. I had been exploring the northern stretches of Algonquin Lake, looking for solitude and quiet reflection. On the third day, as the sun dipped low and mist began to rise from the water, I spotted a small cabin along the shoreline, partially hidden behind thick pine trees. It looked abandoned, the wooden exterior weathered and gray, the windows dark. I paddled closer, curiosity pulling me in despite a faint unease. As I landed and stepped onto the dock, I noticed footprints in the mud. Fresh, but strangely small and elongated, almost like they belonged to something inhuman. The door to the cabin creaked slightly in the wind, beckoning me inside. I hesitated, but exhaustion and curiosity got the better of me. The air felt unnaturally heavy, and the lake itself seemed to hold its breath. Whatever had been here was gone, but it hadn't left entirely. I stepped onto the creaking wooden floor of the cabin. Dust hung thick in the air, and every board groaned beneath my weight. The interior was sparse: a small table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace filled with cold ashes. Yet something felt wrong. The room was too silent, too still. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, and I could swear I heard something shuffling behind me, though the cabin was empty. Then I saw it. The walls were covered in symbols etched deep into the wood, strange shapes that seemed to twist when I blinked. A chill ran down my spine as I traced one with my fingers, and the wood felt unnaturally warm, almost alive. A sudden noise made me spin, soft footsteps on the floor above. There was no staircase. My heart thumped as I realized the cabin itself was shifting, changing subtly, as if preparing me for something I wasn't meant to see. I backed away from the walls, my flashlight trembling in my hand, the carved symbols seeming to pulse faintly in the dim light. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft but deliberate, carrying across the cabin. "You shouldn't be here." My heart raced as the sound seemed to circle me, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I moved toward the fireplace for some sense of grounding, only to notice that the ashes had shifted. In the center of the hearth, something had been etched into the ash in the same strange symbols on the walls. I dropped to my knees to study it, and that's when I felt it. Something brushing past me, cold and wet, like the touch of water, yet unseen. A sudden gust slammed the door behind me. The cabin shook violently, the walls groaning, and the temperature dropped sharply. The whispering escalated into voices, overlapping, calling out warnings I didn't understand, but somehow felt deep in my bones. I scrambled to the window, hoping to escape, but the world outside had shifted. The lake no longer reflected the sunset. It was black and still, like ink, with thick fog curling over its surface. The pine trees looked taller, darker, and impossibly close, as if the forest had moved to surround the cabin entirely. A soft, wet tapping began on the roof, irregular but deliberate. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a shadow pass across the ceiling, limbs elongated, moving in a way that defied physics. The whispering became clearer, forming a single chilling command: "You belong here. Forever." Panic surged through me. I ran back to the door, yanking on it, but it wouldn't budge. Every sense screamed at me that the cabin was alive, and that it had been waiting for someone like me. Something unseen had marked me as its next prey, and escape wasn't guaranteed. I pressed myself against the door, pulling with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The tapping on the roof grew louder, more insistent, as if something above was circling, waiting for me to panic. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath formed icy clouds that hung in the air like warning signs. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to twitch and bend, elongating unnaturally toward me, as if alive. I stumbled back toward the fireplace, and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, casting eerie reflections in the dark. A whisper emerged from the hearth itself. "Stay, or join us." My instincts screamed to run, yet some unseen force held me there, rooted in fear and curiosity. I realized that the cabin didn't just trap people physically, it trapped their attention, their awareness. Every glance, every step I took made it stronger, closer. I could hear the lake outside whispering too, ripples forming shapes, shadows stretching into the cabin, as if the world beyond had become part of this living nightmare. Desperation pushed me to the small window near the table. I pried at it, hoping to climb out, but the glass didn't budge, and the frame seemed to grow tighter in my grip. I heard it then, a low, guttural hum rising from the floorboards, vibrating through my bones. The cabin itself seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with my fear, alive with intent. I stumbled backward into the corner, shivering, flashlight quivering in my hands. Then I saw it. A shadow detached itself from the wall, forming a humanoid figure with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its eyes were faintly luminous, fixated on me. The whispers converged into one chilling message. "You are ours now. Forever." I realized with clarity that escape would require more than strength. The cabin didn't allow you to leave. It forced you to belong. Every instinct screamed survival, yet I understood I was already trapped, a pawn in its dark, living design. Panic clawed at me as I backed into the corner, my flashlight casting shaky beams across the walls. The figure loomed closer, its limbs bending and stretching unnaturally, shadowy forms crawling along its edges. The carved symbols on the walls now glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat in rhythm with my own terror. I could hear the lake outside lapping violently against the shore. Though there was no wind, no storm, only the cabin responding to my fear. A voice, deep and hollow, echoed from every corner at once. "You cannot leave. You are ours." My skin crawled as the air thickened, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled forward, nearly falling over the table, and noticed the floorboards had shifted, creating a pathway toward the hearth. It was as if the cabin itself was guiding me, forcing me toward the center, toward something I couldn't yet see but instinctively feared. The sense of being watched pressed in from all sides. I realized the cabin wasn't just a location, it was alive, and I was ensnared completely. With trembling hands, I reached the hearth. The symbols etched into the ash now glowed a dull crimson, pulsating in a rhythm that matched the whispering voices. The figure hovered just above the floor, limbs stretched at impossible angles, eyes faintly luminous, watching my every move. The room seemed to warp, the walls bending inward as though breathing. I tried to back away, but the cabin's energy pressed against me like a physical weight. The whispers escalated into a deafening chorus. "Stay. Belong. Never leave." My mind raced. I had to act, had to escape. But every route I considered dissolved before me. The window seemed impossibly small, the door impossibly heavy. Even the floor seemed alive, trembling with anticipation. Then I understood. The cabin didn't merely trap bodies. It trapped attention, fear, and willpower. It fed on those who dared to step inside, reshaping reality to bend them to its dark intent. I was already part of its collection, though I had yet to realize the full extent. I sank to my knees, heart hammering, realizing there was no traditional escape. The whispers became a chorus of demands, echoing from every wall, floorboard, and even the lake outside. "Stay. Forever." The figure moved closer, gliding across the warped floor, limbs twisting in impossible ways, eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my body was frozen, paralyzed by the oppressive presence that seemed to radiate from every corner of the cabin. I glanced at the window once more. Outside, the fog had thickened, the lake appearing black and bottomless. The trees seemed impossibly tall, reaching down like claws. The cabin itself pulsed with life, shifting subtly as if it were breathing, its very walls alive and aware of me. I knew then that the cabin didn't just exist on the lake, it controlled it. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat was its domain. And now, I was a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I finally found the strength to act, forcing myself toward the door. The cabin groaned and warped around me, as if it were aware of my movements and responding with anger. The whispers escalated into a scream that reverberated through the walls and lake alike. "You belong here." I wrenched the door open, only to find the shoreline had vanished. Thick fog covered everything, and the lake's surface reflected a black void. I ran blindly into the mist, tripping over roots and rocks, and when I finally looked back, the cabin was gone. No structure, no dock, no indication it had ever existed. Only the forest and the fog remained. But I knew the truth. The cabin hadn't disappeared. It was out there, waiting for the next traveler brave or foolish enough to enter. Even now, I avoid that stretch of Algonquin Lake. The memory lingers, and I sometimes hear faint whispering in the wind. Once the cabin chooses you, it never truly lets go. My name is Marcus Delaney, and this happened during the winter of 2019. I'd been traveling through Willow Creek, a tiny Ontario town known for its dense forests and long, isolated winters. I was a freelance photographer, chasing the eerie beauty of abandoned places when I stumbled upon an old, crumbling church on the outskirts of town. Its doors hung crooked, and frost clung to the stained glass windows, obscuring the interior. As I approached, I felt a sudden chill, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your breath catch in your throat. The snow beneath my boots seemed unnaturally soft, muffling every step, yet I was aware of a faint crunch behind me. I turned, but nothing was there, only shadows stretching oddly along the trees. The moment I stepped inside the church, a sense of being watched gripped me. The air smelled damp and metallic, and the long, narrow aisles seemed to stretch farther than they should. Something unseen lurked in the darkness, waiting, observing, and I had no idea what I had just awakened. I carefully stepped into the church, my flashlight piercing the darkness. The pews were rotting, and dust motes floated in the cold air. At first, it seemed empty, but then I noticed the shadows along the walls. They weren't static. They twisted subtly, creeping toward me, though the source of light remained constant. I moved down the central aisle, the beam of my flashlight catching glimpses of something shifting in the corners of my vision. A low whispering began, soft at first, unintelligible, then gradually forming words. "Leave, before it finds you." My heart pounded, and I froze. The air grew icy, carrying a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I realized the church wasn't abandoned in the traditional sense. The shadows had a life of their own, moving independently, creeping toward anyone who dared enter. And now, they had noticed me. The walls seemed to breathe, the darkness thickening as though the building itself had awoken, aware and hungry. I moved cautiously down the aisle, flashlight beam trembling, as the shadows seemed to lengthen and twist with every step I took. The whispering grew louder, overlapping in a low, guttural chorus. You shouldn't be here. Leave now." My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would echo in the empty walls. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, yet my curiosity anchored me, forcing me to keep moving deeper into the church. Then I saw it. The altar, cracked and worn, covered in dark stains that looked disturbingly fresh. Behind it, the shadows were thicker, almost tangible, like a living fog that pressed against the walls and floor. I tried to photograph them, but the camera's screen flickered and went black, as though the shadows themselves refused to be captured. The whispering voices became more distinct, forming urgent words that reverberated in my mind. "You will join us. If you stay." A cold wind swept through the aisles, though the doors and windows were sealed tight. The church wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, feeding on fear. I stepped closer to the altar, my hands shaking as the shadows writhed more aggressively, almost reaching toward me. The whispering escalated into multiple overlapping voices, each one pressing against my mind with urgent commands. Stay. Belong. Never leave. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the edges of the pews and the wooden floorboards. My breath came out in visible clouds, curling unnaturally in the oppressive darkness. Suddenly, the shadows leapt from the walls, stretching across the floor like black rivers, twisting and elongating toward me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pew, and my flashlight skittered across the floor, illuminating faintly humanoid shapes within the darkness, their eyes glowing a dim yellow. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, pressing against my chest, filling the church with an almost physical weight of malevolence. I understood then that this place didn't merely harbor shadows. It controlled them. Anyone who stepped inside became prey, and the shadows would wait, patient and relentless, until they claimed you. I scrambled to my feet, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. But the shadows didn't retreat. They moved independently now, slithering along the pews and floorboards, elongating and twisting with unnatural fluidity. The whispers were deafening, no longer coming from one place, but from all directions at once. You cannot leave. Stay with us. My heart pounded violently, every beat echoing in my skull like a drum, synchronized with a pulsing energy in the shadows. I tried the door, locked. Windows? Frozen shut. The church had become a trap, a predator cloaked in darkness, alive and aware of my every move. I stumbled back toward the altar, where the humanoid shapes in the shadows were more defined now, their dimly glowing eyes fixed on me. Each step I took caused the shadows to ripple and stretch further, closing the space around me. Panic and dread consumed me. Yet something in my mind urged me to stay calm. If I didn't, the shadows would know fear, and they thrived on it. Desperation drove me toward the pulpit at the far end, where the shadows were thickest, crawling like living smoke along the floor and walls. I could hear their whispers now inside my mind, insistent and terrifying. Join us. Forever. My flashlight flickered violently, casting the shadows into a frenzy of movement. They leapt and twisted in ways no human body could, wrapping around the altar as though guarding it. I fell to the floor, pressing my hands over my ears to block the mental assault, but it was futile. The church itself pulsed with malevolent energy, walls bending subtly, the floorboards creaking and shifting beneath me. I realized with horrifying clarity that this place wasn't just haunted. It was sentient, and it fed on fear, shaping reality to trap anyone who entered. The shadows advanced, filling the aisles, enveloping the pews. I understood then that escape required more than running. It required defying the church's will. something no visitor had ever achieved before. I gathered what little courage I had left and slowly rose to my feet, keeping my eyes locked on the altar. The shadows were no longer passive. They twisted and lunged, slithering across the floor like black water, their elongated limbs scraping against the rotting wood. The whispers had become a cacophony, echoing in my head. "You belong to us. You cannot leave." My flashlight flickered, revealing faint humanoid forms lurking in corners, their yellow eyes glimmering like dying embers. I tried to focus on the door, but the shadows stretched toward it, distorting the space so that the exit seemed miles away. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to take careful, deliberate steps toward the altar. Something at the center pulsed, a small, dark object I hadn't noticed before. The shadow's attention was drawn to it, and in that moment, I realized the church itself was alive, feeding, and the object was the heart of its power. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the pull of curiosity and survival kept me moving forward. I approached the altar cautiously, my hands trembling. The pulsing object was dark, jagged, almost organic, radiating a cold energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The shadows circled around it, moving in synchronized patterns, whispering in unison. Claimed, claimed, claimed. I realized that the church's power emanated from this object, and everything I had witnessed, the shifting walls, the creeping shadows, was an extension of its will. The floor beneath me trembled as if alive, and the shadows lunged toward me, testing my resolve. I forced myself to step closer, knowing instinctively that confronting the object might be my only chance to survive. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the cold tang of fear. Each step felt like a battle against gravity and the will of the building itself. The church seemed to watch, to calculate, anticipating my every movement. I understood that this was more than a haunting. It was a sentient predator, and the shadows were its hunters. I froze for a moment at the altar, staring at the pulsing dark object. The shadows surged around it like living water, elongating and writhing with unnatural fluidity. My mind screamed to flee, but my body refused. The whispers had become deafening, filling the church with a chorus of demands. Take your place, belong to us, forever. My breath came in ragged gasps, freezing in the icy air, as if the church itself had stolen my warmth. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed the object. It was heavier than it appeared, cold and pulsing like a heartbeat. The shadows reacted violently, twisting into horrifying shapes, screaming in silence. The building groaned, walls bending subtly as if the church were alive and aware that I had dared touch its power. For the first time, I felt a spark of control. If I could carry this object outside, perhaps I could break its hold. But the shadows weren't finished, moving faster, closing in, their eyes fixed on me with predatory intelligence. I bolted toward the door, clutching the pulsing object, the shadows surging behind me like living smoke. Every step felt heavier, the floorboard groaning beneath me as if resisting my escape. The whispers had transformed into a single, echoing command. Return. Belong. Forever. My vision blurred as icy wind swirled around the room, the walls stretching and twisting in impossible angles. Finally, I reached the entrance and shoved the door open. The snow-covered night outside greeted me like salvation, and I stumbled onto the frozen ground, breathless, heart hammering. I didn't stop running until the church disappeared behind the misty tree line, its dark presence lingering only in my mind. Even now, I can feel it watching. The shadows follow me in dreams, and every winter night in Ontario, when the wind whistles through the trees, I hear faint whispers calling my name. Willow Creek's church wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, and it never forgets those who enter. As the shadows of Willow Creek fade into memory, we are reminded that Ontario's small towns are not always what they seem. From abandoned cabins on misty lakes to churches alive with creeping darkness, each story we've shared tonight proves one terrifying truth. The ordinary world hides horrors beyond comprehension, and curiosity can lead even the strongest minds into unimaginable terror. These were not legends, tales for campfires, or fictional scares. Every encounter you've witnessed was reported by real people, ordinary residents who stepped into places where help does not reach, and found themselves face to face with forces that defy explanation. From vanishing figures in snowy forests to rooms that shift and breathe. Tonight's 7 stories showcase the chilling reality that fear can live